Need more time to correct that? Let's open our Bibles tonight to the book of John, chapter 11. John chapter 11. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, in Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. And when Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death. That's not the purpose of it. You know, this death was not just to get rid of Lazarus. This death was not the end in and of itself. The final purpose is not going to be death, but for the glory of God. And by the way, even death is for the glory of God. We don't often think about that. But for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Last Sunday night we looked at Martha, and because we're going to be looking at her sister, there is going to be a little overlap. I've tried to keep the overlap to a minimum. And in looking at Mary, the sister of Lazarus, I tried to bring out things that were particular to her. I hope the message will be an encouragement. Then I also hope that as we look at Mary, there'll be a sense of guilt, a sense of failure many times on our part, a time of examining ourselves to see if we are like Mary or if we are like Mary in word only. First of all, and the outline is very simple. What do we know about her? And then what do we know about her actions or her life and putting her words into action? Two simple points. First of all, and I put this one first, but I want you to put your, if you've got one of these little things, put it there in John, because we will be coming back to that as our next point. But go back to the book of Luke, if you will. Luke chapter 10, and beginning with verse 38. Now I went from 9 to 11. I know 10's in here. There we are. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. Now it came to pass as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his words. But Martha was cumbered about with much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her, therefore, that she help me. Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful. Not having the steaks cooked right, not having the potatoes peeled and mashed, not having the green beans, cooked and seasoned and all of that. There's only one thing that's needful. And Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. The first thing we notice about her is that she had a sister and brother. Martha was her sister, we've looked at, and Lazarus, who we may look at later. But she had a brother and a sister. But I want you to, and I don't know why, I've read this passage probably several hundred times and never saw one little word, three-letter word, and I read it and I thought, that can't be right. So I got out my trusty commentaries, looked at several of my commentaries, and they every one agreed that that one word, three letters, is important. I've read it hundreds of times and never saw that one word. Look in verse 38. Came to pass as they went that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into, there's that three-letter word, her house. And I thought, when I finally, she invited him into her house. There are several ideas about how this got to be her house. It wasn't Mary's house. It wasn't Lazarus's house. It was Martha's house. Several speculations. One is that Martha was a widow, and when her husband died, she inherited the house and continued to live there. There's no indication, and again, I searched, and if it's there, I missed it. There's no indication that Mary or Lazarus, either one, were married. No record of either one of them being married. So Martha owned the house. It was her house, but she was allowing Mary and Lazarus to live with her because they were not married. They did not have a house, and so they lived with Martha. Now, if you're thinking ahead, you already see some problems coming up. Let's look at them just in case you missed them. In the house, you looked last week, Martha was busy, cleaning, cooking, setting the table, making sure everything was right. And because her priorities were out of order, she became very critical, and her criticism was aimed primarily at Mary. Mary was sitting at the feet, listening to Jesus teach and learning. Now, when I begin to put all of this together, we read there in John that Mary brought a bottle of very, very expensive ointment and anointed Jesus, anointed his head. It ran all the way down to his feet, and then she dried his feet with her hair. She got criticized, but if you look back over in John chapter 12, you'll see that Jesus said, "Let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this." Mary anointed Jesus in preparation for his burial. Where did she learn and understand about his burial? The apostles didn't get it. The apostles totally missed when Jesus, even later, Jesus said, the Son of Man goeth to Jerusalem. There he must be crucified. There he must be buried. And 3 days later, he will arise. The apostles totally missed it. They did not get that Jesus Christ came to be killed, to die on the cross, to be buried, and then to raise again the third day. Even after Jesus died and the reports came that, hey, he's alive, they still didn't get it. Oh, you saw a spirit, and you know that story. But Martha understood, sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening, learning. She was given insight that even the apostles did not get. Sometimes people wonder, well, I just never saw that. Or I still don't see it. Paul wrote that the cardinal, the natural man receiveth not the things of God because they are spiritually discerned. Martha didn't get it because she was busy. Lazarus seems to have been there because it said that, Mary sat, let me read it. Mary and there were others that sat with Jesus' feet. They didn't get it, but Mary understood. If you want to understand spiritual things, it requires sitting and listening. It requires study. Remember, Paul wrote young Timothy and said, study to show thyself approved unto God. You will never understand spiritual things until you spend time in God's Word at the feet of Jesus, listening and learning. Mary sat at the feet of Jesus, and she understood from his teaching that he was going to die and be buried, and so she did what she could. She anointed him for his burial. How do I know the apostles didn't get it? Because it's like, what a waste. What a waste. Well, we find that Mary was attacked. Here she is, putting the things of God first. Here she is, listening and learning from Jesus. And she's attacked because she was not doing what someone else thought she should be doing. Now, I will come back to this when I get to the application. But there is always going to be people that will tell you what you ought to do. There's always going to be somebody that is going to criticize whatever decision you make, and especially if it's sitting at the feet of Jesus and learning at the feet of Jesus. There will be people who think that instead of listening and reading the Word of God, you should be doing something else. Martha owned the house. She allowed Mary and Lazarus to live there. Mary was the guest in Martha's house, and Martha accused her of being ungrateful. Look at all I have done for you. I have given you a place to live. I've given you a roof over your head. I have given you a place to sleep. I have given you food to eat. And what do I get in appreciation? You sit down and make me do all the work. Martha thought she knew what Mary should be doing. And Jesus said, no, there's only one thing that's important. And that is, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Seek ye first. Mary was attacked for not doing what Martha thought she should be doing. You know, as I thought about this, I have been insulted so many times as a pastor. I have been insulted more than I could ever possibly remember. Any insult can be hurtful. Any insult can hurt your feelings. And sometimes they even go down into your very soul and eat at you. But when it's family, somehow it seems to be worse. You know, when your family attacks you, and this is the Martha that we looked at last week, that Jesus loved Martha, and though she is loved by Jesus, she was saved, she was a born-again believer, she was a disciple of Jesus Christ. It wasn't some stranger out there. It was somebody that was a disciple, somebody that was loved by Jesus, someone that you would think would be encouraging you in your Christian service, and yet she was attacked by her own sister. Some suspect that Martha was trying to make her feel guilty for being a freeloader. Maybe, strong possibility. Well, we saw last week when Jesus, that word Lazarus is sick. Lazarus died. Martha went out there, stood in front of Jesus, and said, "You could have prevented this if you had just come when I called you." I'm paraphrasing. And we saw that while Martha was rebuking Christ, Mary was busy worshiping Christ. She fell on her face. She fell down at his feet. She presented her case. Lord, I have no doubt. I know you could have healed him if you had come, but she did it from a position of submission. Whenever you fell on your face before someone, you were submitting to them. And she also did it from a position of worship. She's lost her brother. Her brother is dead. She's grieving. She's weeping. But even in her grief, she still took a position of submission and a position of worship. Trials make some people bitter and some people better. I was talking to a lady, I don't remember if it was last week or week before. I knew the lady, known her for a while. She was pregnant the night before the baby was due. Something happened. They did an autopsy. They got the medical. I don't understand all the medical, but somehow or other the baby died in her womb. 9 months, due the next day. And so she went through labor, delivered the baby. They had a funeral. And so when I ran into her last week or week before, she knows I'm a preacher, and so we began talking. She's very active in her church, very strong believer. She's, I know God has a purpose. I know God has a plan. But he took my daughter, fully developed, fully formed. And we talked for quite a while. And though she just lost her daughter, that they had already made plans, they had already got the bedroom ready, got everything ready, she said, I still have to believe that God's in control, that God has a purpose. I don't have to understand it. I just have to believe. Mary lost her brother. And if you read on down in John chapter 11, the only reference, the shortest verse in the whole Bible was Jesus wept. He wept when he saw Mary weeping, and he saw the others weeping. But the emphasis, I believe, was on Mary. She was submissive. She fell at his feet. She was submissive. Lord, not my will, but thy will be done. And she was worshiping, even in her grief. She was worshiping him, but she was still crying. Even in her grief, her pain, her suffering, she managed to maintain a spirit of submission and worship. How many of us could have done that? Well, let's notice her actions a little bit more. Some of us have heard the old adage, actions speak louder than words. Some of you young whippersnappers may not have heard that, but there's a song that I have in my car, listen to occasionally, and I'm not going to sing it because I don't know all the words from memory. But there is a phrase in that song that says, your walk talks, and your talk talks, but your walk talks louder than your talk. And if you can put that into music, the whole song You familiar with that? I love it. Especially the bass part, you know. Don't tell me what you are. Show me. I don't want to hear your love for God. I don't want to hear your love for Christ. I don't want to hear your love for the church. Show me. Show me your Christianity. Show me your dedication. Show me your love for God. Show me your love for Christ. Don't tell me how much you love Jesus when you don't bother to come to his house. As I preached this morning, this is the temple. This is the tabernacle. This is the bride. This is the pillar and ground. And you can't love God and hate his bride. Somebody says, Brother Ellis, I just want you to know, I think the world of you, but I can't stand your wife. Do you think I'm going to hug them and say, oh, thank you for loving me? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write them off. I'm going to check them, scratch their name off. You can't love me without loving my... Now, you can love her without loving me. And a lot of folks do. I get it. But you're not complimenting me when you attack my wife, neglect my wife, harm my wife, ignore my wife, insult my wife. You're not telling how much you love me if you don't love my wife. Don't tell me how much you love Jesus when you don't love his church. And we preached that this morning. She anointed the feet of Jesus with precious ointment. One gospel gives it, she anointed his head. One says she anointed his feet. Most people agree she anointed his head, and it ran all down his body to his feet, and then she took her hair and dried it. It was very expensive. I gave some numbers last week. Some thinks it was more, some thinks it was less. Nobody is for sure exactly what it was worth, except it was very expensive. There's no indication that Mary was rich. No indication that Mary was independently wealthy. No indication that she had lots of money. So this was not, I got $100 billion. $1,000 is nothing. Wasn't the case. She was living with her sister, so she wasn't able to buy her own house and live in her own house, so she was living with her sister, and yet she took something that was valued way up into the thousands of dollars and poured it on Jesus, anointed him. This would have been a tremendous sacrifice on her part. It was an act of the greatest love for someone. To take the most precious thing you've got and give it to someone because of your love for them. She could have bought a whole week's worth of groceries. Who knows if it was worth what Some people estimate she might even have been able to buy a house with it. But she took something that was very precious and very expensive. And in the greatest act of love and the greatest act of worship, she bestowed it on Jesus. Now, I've said before, I would do almost anything, legal and moral, for my wife if she needed it. I would do almost anything for our kids if they needed it. And you that are parents, I bet you have sacrificed for your children. Why? Because you love them. You love them. Mary's love for Jesus was so much more than the value of this jar of perfume. She had a proper sense of the value of Jesus Christ. And her love and worship far exceeded her concern about cost. Some people, that's the first thing they think of. What's it going to cost? Mary didn't care. Her love for Christ, her love for her Savior was so great. She wasn't concerned with how much it cost. Again, she was criticized. This time by the apostles. First time was her sister. Now it's the apostles, those in leadership, those who are to be the leaders of the church. They criticize her. I can almost hear, well, in fact, Judas, do you know what you could do with all that money? And if you tithe, you may have heard, do you know what you could do with your tithe? Years and years and years ago, I was between churches. I sold life insurance. I know, don't throw rotten tomatoes. But I sold insurance and made really good money. And I looked at some of the other salesmen in our office. They would go out and buy these $20,000, $30,000 boats. They would buy brand new cars. They were buying this, and I knew I was making as much or more than they were. And we looked at our budget. There's no way we could pay $30,000 for a boat. And so finally, we're like, are we mismanaging? What are we doing? And it's like, my wife said, honey, look at how much we give to the church. And it was way more than 10%. And we still give more than 10%. We figured out with our tithe for a year and a half, we could buy that new boat by just using our tithe to buy a boat rather than tithe. We could have bought a brand new car. We could have bought all the things they bought. But you see, we had one rule that we made. I had it before I got married. And when we got married, it remained the first thing when I got paid. The very first thing was we set our tithe aside. Before we bought groceries, I've told you, if we had $5 for the week to buy groceries, we were eating pretty good. If we had $10 to buy groceries, woo, we were on top of the world. We never took one penny, no matter how desperate we got. Because I wanted to brag about it? No, because nobody knew. But you see, I don't tithe because I have to. I don't tithe because you'll fire me if I don't. We tithe because we love the Lord. And that measly percent that we give back is nothing compared to what he paid for me, for my sins. Why do you have to be such a fanatic and go to Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening, and for all special occasions? You know what you're missing? Now, I don't want to make anybody mad. It's not my goal. But if our walk talks, there's a lot of people that don't think very highly of the Lord's church. Many people feel that one service a week and some one service a month is enough. That's all they can handle. It'd be like, I'm only going to go home to my wife one day a month. How long do you think that would last? I love my wife, but I'm only going to go see her once a month. I love the church, but she's not worth seeing more than once a month. Some people have more excuses, and I'm telling my age, than Carter's Little Liver Pills. How many of you remember Carter's Little Liver Pills? You young ones have no idea. That means they've got more excuses than you can count why they can't put God first. On Wednesday night, I worked hard. I worked hard today. By the time I got home, I was tired. Besides, I hadn't eaten supper yet. Now, I don't want to be terribly mean. I understand that some jobs do require working second shift during the week. Some jobs do require. When I was in college, I worked for Coca-Cola, and I worked my way through college working at Coca-Cola. My job, I went in after college. In the morning, when all the trucks pulled out, there was a man that had a sheet for every truck, every drink, every can, every bottle he had on his truck when he pulled out the door. When they came back that afternoon, another man would count what they brought back on their truck. They would send both sheets up to me. I had an assistant. He would count their money, and then I would take what they went out with and what they brought back. What they sold was the difference, and I would multiply that by so much per case. Then I would figure out how much money they were supposed to have at the end of the day. During the winter, I go in at 1 in the winter. I'm out by 4:30 because people just aren't drinking a whole lot in the winter. During the summer, I would go in at 1. Sometimes I wouldn't get out till 10, 11, 12 o'clock, because I couldn't leave until the last truck was checked in. Then I would take all of that downstairs to the office, and I would figure the deposit for the next morning for them to take to the bank when they came in. Summer, 10, 11, 12 o'clock was not unusual. I was going to college. You have to work what you can. We have 8 grandkids. And I got to think, 1, 2, several of them, I'm not going to count them. But we have quite a few of our grandkids are really into sports. I think it's payback, because I couldn't hit t-ball when I was in school. I couldn't bounce a basketball. So God gave my grandkids all the talent to be able to bounce a basketball and shoot and hit the goal occasionally. We've got everything from, it's called upward, but I think the age is 6, 7, 8, somewhere around there, for the little bitty kids. Then we've got junior varsity basketball, junior varsity soccer. Then we've got varsity basketball and varsity soccer. And we try to go to every game that we can. Now, why did I say all that? My wife will call me on the way home from work, and she'll say, now don't forget, so-and-so has a game at 6 o'clock. We will skip supper. I won't bother to change clothes. We rush home, pull one of our cars in the garage, jump in the other car, take off, and most of the time we get there in time to see the game start. Why? Because my grandkids are important to me. My grandkids are important. And if they're playing, I want to be there to encourage them, if nothing else. The other night, my wife forgot, and by the time we realized, oops, we got a game at 6 o'clock. It's like, well, I was going to fix supper, but you know what? Forget supper. Let's go watch our grandkid. I've noticed people usually do what they want to do. And this is true in the world. It's true in church. Oh, I am so tired. Oh, well, somebody gave me free tickets to the Bengals football game right on the 50-yard line, front row. Now, if you're a Bengal fan, you know what? You're going to forget about being tired. You're going to jump up. You're going to jump in the car. You're going to drive to the stadium. You're going to stand in line for an hour. You're going to go sit on hard seats. You're going to pay $20 for a hot dog. And you don't mind at all. But when it comes to church, I love the Lord, just not that much. Just not that much. Or, and I promise I'm not picking on anybody. Did you know Cousin Claude is going to be in town? He lives in Southern California. He only comes to Kentucky once every 20 years, And if you miss him, you won't see him again for 20 years. For one thing, I don't have any relative. If I haven't seen them in 20 years, they're not worth my visit anyway. But it's like, oh, Cousin Claude's going to be in town, and I haven't seen Cousin Claude in 20 years. Well, you know what? If I don't see him for another 20, it's not going to be any hair off my head. And yet, we will do whatever it takes if it's something we really enjoy and something we really want to do. Many nights when I would get off at Coke, I would have my Coca-Cola uniform on. You know, it's the real thing, big emblem on back, Coca-Cola on front. And my wife was working, so I would walk to church. It was about 5 miles. I would walk to church, walk in with my uniform on, because to me, I wanted to be at church. I wanted to be there. I could walk 5 miles back then. Should not our love for Christ exceed our love for sports? The only reason I go to sports is strictly because of grandkids. I would never set foot on another ball field anywhere if it wasn't, I love my grandkids. They're important to me. But shouldn't the love for Christ exceed dinner, our friends, our relatives, and anything else that Satan puts in our path? Because after all, who wins when you don't go? Satan does. Satan is the... All I did was loose the horses. If you weren't here for devotion, you missed that one. And don't you explain it to them. They should have been here. School has become a major factor. I have a midterm exam tomorrow. I got to stay home and study. Well, you've heard what my parents told me. I know you've heard it. I've told you. I can't go to church tonight because I've got a midterm exam tomorrow. Well, you know what? You should have studied when you got home instead of going outside and playing. If you make an F, you make an F, you're going to church. That was never open for debate. Moving on, last point. How much ridicule are you willing to endure because of your service to Christ? Jesus said, woe unto you when the world speaks good of you. If the world hates me, it's going to hate you. Beware of being friends with the world, because the world is at enmity with God. And yet many Christians give up and quit because somebody criticized their hat. Had a lady, I liked her, I really did. But I walked in church one Sunday and she had the ugliest hat you could ever imagine. You can't even imagine a hat as ugly as her hat was. So I went up and shook hands and she said, "Oh, how do you like my hat?" How would you answer that? I said, "Well, you know, I don't think I've ever seen one like that before." "You don't like it, do you?" I didn't say that. Some people get their feelings hurt over the smallest thing. Mary was committed to Christ. She sat at his feet and learned, though others criticized. She poured a very expensive bottle of ointment on Jesus, even though she was criticized. How much criticism does it take to stop you from serving God?